Today on Ag News Daily.
Fight against weed resistance is an ongoing battle, and while we are getting closer to the finish line for Viconic soybeans, the fight against weed resistance, it feels like a moving target, that finish line. So the goal is to always stay ahead of that and to always think of what's the next best good thing that we can bring to the market.
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. You got your planters running yet?
We're running. Are you?
We are. Well, kind of. Seems like it started off really smooth, and then we've been battling the corn planter for the last couple of days.
And maybe now we're going to battle some weather as well, question mark?
Maybe. It seemed like it started off more widespread and got spotty as it hit here. We did see lighter showers earlier this week that stayed mostly north. For some field work progress, it happened in the farther south, but another system late this week is expected to bring more widespread rain and the risk of severe thunderstorms. Multiple systems have also been forecasted into this weekend and into next week, keeping the weather patterns active across much of the country. We will continue to keep an eye on conditions. Wet conditions in the southern U.S. could lead to more planting delays and even damage to winter wheat as saturated soils continue to persist. Meanwhile, other areas of drought in the northwest may see some improvement with these upcoming systems. Temperatures will remain variable, but could settle closer to the average for next week. I know waking up in the morning, it was chilly, and then you'd lose your sweatshirt because you couldn't remember where you took it off at.
Yeah, it's that weird time of year.
It is. In the central and southern plains, we saw where winter wheat is developing finally get some much-needed relief, although recent heat has stressed some of the crops, and our weekend system is targeting that region with a moderate to heavy rain possibility and some thunderstorms. The active pattern looks to continue into next week, bringing more moisture, especially to those drier southern areas, though southern temperatures may stay a bit on the warmer side. So kind of a mixed bag.
And I was driving in Kansas this week yesterday. There was already some wildfires. Saw some warnings when I was driving on 35 South and saw some wildfires off into the distance. So I know they certainly could use some.
We have had no shortage of wind, that's for sure.
Definitely not. But corn planting across the U.S. is off to a slightly slower start this year. According to USDA's latest crop progress report, just 4% of the nation's corn crop is planted as of last Sunday, just below the 5-year average, which was at 5% this time last year. Wet field conditions are certainly causing some delays in several regions and maybe dry conditions in certain areas as well. Soybean plantings are right on pace with 2% of the crop now in the ground, matching the typical rate for this time of year. And winter wheat conditions have slightly declined. 47% of the crop is rated good to excellent, down 1 percentage point from last week, and 8 points lower than this time last year. 8% of that crop is headed, which is in line with the average, and spring wheat planting is well underway as well, with 7% completed, a pace consistent with that 5-year average. But driving across Iowa and Kansas, I certainly saw quite a few planters rolling, Tanner.
Yeah, it seemed like this was the week for people to get started if they were in this region. President Trump's administration is planning major cuts to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, according to the internal White House documents obtained by a government executive. The proposed fiscal 2026 budget would slash funding for programs in agriculturally related research and conservation, and lead to widespread office closures and staffing cuts at the local level. Agencies such as the Farm Service Agency, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and USDA Rural Development, which will collectively employ about 20,000 people, could be hit the hardest. Additionally, there are multiple articles sharing that the USDA plans to dismantle its headquarters in D.C. and lay off thousands of more workers there, according to several officials who had been briefed on those plans. We'll continue to keep an eye on this, but according to government executive article, the department has not responded to a request for comment, but previewed these types of changes during the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins' first day. So this has been in the works for quite some time. We'll continue to keep an eye on that, but more than 10% of the USDA's 100,000 employees may already be on their way out. E&E News is reporting that over 12,000 staff have accepted buyout offers, including 3,100 at the Forest Service, 1,200 at Animal and Plant Health. These buyouts come with paid leave through September and are expected to be followed by firings. Meanwhile, the USDA is also preparing to relocate many employees to 3 regional hubs across the country out of that D.C. location. A recent USDA memo with documents provided to the government executives this week, according to a few of the sources, does warn of further workforce reductions and office consolidations, citing the presidential order aimed at improving government efficiency. Well, it's not a lot of great news in that article. The agency does say the goal is to move staff closer to the farmers, ranchers, and the communities that they serve, but the final plans for this are still in development.
Well, I think we've already seen that at a lot of the county levels, as we've seen FSA offices maybe close or reduce staff, and sounds like I'm hearing a lot of sentiment that that's going to continue to consolidate maybe to county offices or multi-county offices even.
That's not necessarily closer to farmers.
No, it's not. We also saw this week the USDA has officially canceled the Partnerships for Climate-Smart Commodities program, a $3.1 billion initiative that was launched under the Biden administration. It's now being replaced with a new effort called Advancing Markets for Producers, or AMP. This shift, announced on April 14th, comes after a freeze on the climate-smart funding while the Trump administration reviewed that program. The USDA says the majority of the original 130-plus projects had, according to a press release, sky-high administration fees, with less than half of the federal dollars going directly to farmers. According to the press release, some projects will still receive funding so long as the following requirements are met. 1, projects must allocate at least 65% of the funds to producers. They must have been enrolled at least one producer by the end of 2024, and they had to have received a payment or been made a payment to by the end of 2024. One of those other programs that is going to continue under the new AMP program is the National Pork Board's Advancing U.S. Pork Sustainability and Market Value Project. The board says it has received USDA approval to move forward and will release more information soon, among one of many organizations commenting on these cancellations of projects there, Tanner.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what announcements start coming up and more press releases that we get to share with our audience here in the upcoming weeks. We do have an update on undocumented farm workers. Last week, President Trump indicated a new program will be set up to help legalize farm workers. The hope is to reduce the risk of farmers losing undocumented workers to mass deportations. During a cabinet meeting late last week, it was discussed that there would be an ease on restrictions around undocumented farm labor, which marked the first time the president has signaled a willingness to temper his mass deportation plans to help protect the labor pool for industries such as agriculture. Undocumented workers will be given a chance to self-deport and return to the country legally, he said. Additionally, more news coming from the White House, and the White House official told NBC News that President Trump does want to improve the H-2A program, where employers such as those in the agricultural industry can hire temporary workers. About 40% of the U.S. crop farm workers are undocumented, according to the Agriculture Department. President Trump did say, we're going to work with people so that way they can go out in a nice way and go back to their country. We're going to work with them right from the beginning on trying to get back in legally. So, very pointed quote with a solution potentially presented in that article.
Seems like this has been an ongoing issue for multiple decades, so We'll see how it gets handled.
That's right. And continuing to focus on the South, we're talking water in Mexico. USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins is calling out Mexico over the growing water crisis. Farmers that are struggling with drought in the southern parts of Texas after a Twitter post led to some negotiations. She said late last week, a high-level negotiation with Mexican officials may be about to lead to a breakthrough, Rollins said. The post from President Trump's account on Truth Social about Mexico stealing our farmers' water led to a very quick phone call from the Mexican official to schedule talks on that subject. The president led his post with Mexico owes Texas 1.3 million acre-feet of water under the 1944 Water Treaty, but Mexico is unfortunately violating their treaty obligations. The treaty requires Mexico to send 1.7 million acre-feet of water to the United States every 5 years from tributaries that feed the Rio Grande. Secretary of Ag Rollins spoke about the pending discussions as frustration continued to build over Mexico falling short on its water deliveries under that 1944 Water Treaty. So more to come on that.
Well, a couple of new reports released earlier this week, including one from CoBank, noting rapidly worsening expectations about everything from inflation to personal income to business conditions and labor supplies due to, of course, elevated economic concerns related to tariffs. The question of whether the declining expectations will translate into slower spending and tighter profit margins will likely come, they say, in late June. The organization's press release stated historic data suggests that declines in consumer spending begin to become apparent 3 to 5 months after a sharp decline in economic sentiment, putting it at that June timeframe. Consumer spending accounts for about 70% of all U.S. economic activity, and as we know, tariffs on China, 145%, means anything you plug in is likely going to have some sort of tariff on it. Uncertainty over trade and biofuel policy also pulled corn, soybean, and wheat prices down, despite the weaker U.S. dollar. They said trade concerns weighed heaviest on wheat as world buyers have multiple suppliers available. And crop production expenses are expected to continue trending lower, but they remain elevated in relation to lower commodity prices. They also noted that the renewable diesel and biodiesel production has scaled back to find stability in the absence of the blender's tax credit, pushing prices above petroleum. Record high prices for beef cattle remain across the sector despite continuing herd liquidation. And the U.S. pork sector is positioned for, they say, moderate growth this year. But, I was talking to someone this week at the Kansas event, and they were mentioning to me, Tanner, we need to do a little fact checking here and dig into this. But even though the herd has been liquidating, he was saying ranchers are holding cattle back at higher weights. And in reality, we're not seeing maybe that much transition in lower meat.
That's interesting. We do have some tariff trade negotiation updates. Negotiations appear to be underway this week with Japan's lead trade negotiator as they visited D.C. to kick off the first official meeting since President Trump announced those baseline tariffs. It was reported that President Trump did join in on the negotiations, which were said to last over 2 hours. After the meeting, President Trump expressed optimism that progress had been made. Additionally, Italy's prime minister visited D.C. for a sit-down with President Trump to discuss their trade relations. Following the meeting, he stated he believed it would be easy to find an agreement with the EU. So it sounds like things are moving forward in negotiations. More to come there. But all eyes are continuing to focus on what will happen now with China as they've inserted a new trade negotiator for their U.S. relations. The new negotiator participated in the Phase 1 negotiations during the first Trump administration and has extensive overseas experience as China's representative at the World Trade Organization. This also comes as data shows a 30 to 60% drop in container cargo bookings out of China to the United States over the next 3 weeks, while bookings elsewhere in Asia were down 10 to 20% due to the tariffs. No meetings have been scheduled so far, but it appears the Communist Party continues to struggle economically. There are rumors that the CCP will roll out new policy changes next week to further stimulate the economy and provide support to consumer demand. So it'll be interesting. Again, we will be back again next week, probably with more updates on tariff headlines.
No doubt. Seems weekly we're having updates there, but
maybe once a week isn't enough.
Maybe not. Maybe we got to do some special reports here depending on how things shake out. But another report sent late last week, the Farm Credit System says the U.S. economy has entered 2025 with key indicators of favorable positions. Okay, here's some positive news for everyone this week, but expectations for first quarter growth have been reduced, however, by weaker personal consumption, higher imports, and uncertainty around changes in global trade. Farm Credit Services says the U.S. farm sector enters the uncertain trade environment in spring planting season with strong balance sheets, though, and favorable liquidity. Farm income in the early 2025 year here is being supported by payments to crop producers authorized under the American Relief Act that they're saying are helping some of those balance sheets, as well as generally favorable returns for livestock producers in particular. But extended periods of lower commodity prices, particularly for cash grains and tree nuts, are evidence of increasing risk. So maybe short-term positivity here. Of course, also negative retaliatory tariffs on U.S. agricultural products will depend on tariff levels and the duration after this 90-day pause. And additionally, farmland values are showing signs of weakness and increased volatility, particularly for lower quality land and in regions producing the commodities currently at some of those weaker prices that we mentioned there, Tanner.
Yeah, as having a fellow co-host on Farm for Profit, Dave, it is quite interesting to see where he feels land is going to go. And it's a mixed bag.
It is.
Definitely good quality still sells quite well.
Well, a couple of final headlines here before we get into today's interview. Bayer says it may stop producing glyphosate altogether. And they are the world's most popular weed killer. Unless they say they can get official court protection. Like we mentioned in last week's show, there are ongoing lawsuits, quite a few in the hundreds, blaming this herbicide for causing cancer. The Wall Street Journal says Bayer currently produces about 40% of the world's glyphosate needs, which farmers use, of course, to kill multiple crops. And over the last 10 years, the herbicides have also caught Bayer up in a number of lawsuits. In early March, Bayer told farmers, suppliers, and retailers that it may have to stop selling Roundup, which would force U.S. farmers to rely on imported glyphosate or not be able to use the tool altogether. They said we're pretty much reaching the end of our road, according to Bayer's chief executive officer, Bill Anderson, who told the Farm Journal, we're not talking years, but months instead to see this potentially eliminated for growers. The USDA did point out that more than 90% of soybeans, corn, and cotton crops planted in the U.S. are genetically modified to withstand glyphosate-based weed killers, so could be a lot of acres that are impacted. And I listened to something earlier this week with Farm Journal. Margie Eckelkamp was mentioning this as well. So they're a great resource to learn more about this ongoing issue. But we're actually going to be chatting with Bayer today during our interview segment that takes us back to Commodity Classic when we sat down with Bayer Crop Science as they launched their fourth generation of herbicide tolerance for soybeans at this year's show. Discussing more about the new trade and what it looks like to get to this point, such as the regulatory process, is Kacy Perry, the North American Soybean Business Lead, and Frank Rittemann, the North American Soybean Project Manager and Launch Lead. Let's get into that interview now.
Well, we are so excited. Commodity Classic is the place where companies like Bayer launch new products and new services. So we're so excited to be sharing today about a new soybean variety that's been launched here, Viconic. We've got Mr. Viconic with us to talk about this process of developing a new trait like this. We're also joined here by Kacy Perry, the North American Soybean Business Lead for Bayer Crop Science, as well as Frank Rittemann, North American Soybean Project Manager, and Mr. Viconic, as we've been told that your nickname is. So thank you both for joining us.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Well, I would love to start out here, turning our attention to you first, Frank, and talking about how a new product like this comes to light. It's a labor of love, I'm sure, to get a new product to market like this, launching it here at Commodity Classic. What have the last few years been like for you?
It's been exciting times already working on it behind the scenes, and I'm super excited now to be able to bring it to the front of the stage and be talking about Viconic soybeans. We have a little bit of a road ahead of us, but we already have traveled quite some miles on that road. So to your point, it's been. I learned the other day that we started working on this project, bring the Viconic trait to the market, even before we introduced Roundup Ready to Extend soybeans. That's 2 herbicide tolerance generations away. That's when Bayer already started investing into the future of soybeans, as we like to reference Viconic soybeans now.
Wow.
So how did the team come up with the name?
The Viconic name? Well, it's a team effort. A lot of creative work, a lot of creative juices were flowing when we were putting our heads together to come up with a name. As you can imagine, we had a long list of names that we looked. We tested a lot of them, and that name floated to the top relatively early, even in our internal work. Just loved the fit of it, an iconic product. It deserves an iconic name, we think. And then what we didn't mention around Viconic is will be the first soybean to have 5 tolerances.
Wow.
So it's an industry first. Currently, growers have in their offerings, depending on which product they choose, three herbicide tolerances. So moving to 5 will be a step change. And the Roman numeral for 5 is V. So that's how then an iconic product, the V, put together, we have Viconic.
I love that. That is a great origination story for a name like that. It's going to be one that I think is memorable for the industry. Kacy, I would love to understand a little bit more from your perspective, too. You guys work a lot in tandem. What does the commercialization from here look like launching after post-Classic?
Yeah, as Frank said, it's been a journey up to this point, but we still have a little ways to go on the road. So given that Viconic is a new soybean trait, we had to seek approval in the United States for cultivation. And so we have secured the approvals that we need in the United States for farmers to be able to grow Viconic soybeans. But as you know, soybeans are a pretty critical trade product, and we need to secure key import-export market approvals. So right now, Viconic is going through the process with a lot of key export markets, including the European Union and China. So securing those approvals is going to be critical to bring Viconic soybeans to farmers. So right now, we anticipate, and our goal is that we are able to launch Viconic soybeans for farmers to plant in their fields in 2027.
Oh, wow.
And you mentioned 5 herbicide tolerances. Tell me more about what is that all about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the 5 tolerances we have, it's the 3 that are currently being offered and as part of Bayer's commercial offering called Extend Flex. Glyphosate, glufosinate, dicamba tolerance. So growers are used to this offering. And we're adding to it tolerance to 2,4-D herbicides and mesotrione herbicides. So again, Viconic soybeans will be the first that has 5 herbicide tolerances combined. And then for mesotrione, it'll also be an industry first that growers will be able to use mesotrione chemistry in their soybeans. It's a chemistry that's been used fairly broadly in corn today. It's part of the HPPD group, really the backbone of weed management programs in corn. And having worked on the corn side before, I know the benefits that chemistry can bring there, and really particularly excited about bringing then this chemistry offering to soybean growers as well that so far have not been able to use it.
I'm always just so amazed at the amount of runway time that goes into developing new products like this. Multiple years. It may not always be something growers realize how much effort is going into the R&D, the compliance and, approval from the government. Talk to us a little bit more about some of that R&D process. I'm sure you have run extensive field trials across many different geographies. What did some of those results show us?
When you talk about Viconic, it's easy to go right to the fact that it is industry first, as Frank said, with 5 herbicide tolerances. But one thing we're also excited about with Viconic soybeans is that they will bring outstanding yield potential to farmers. So we've had significant trials, and Frank can comment a little on the numbers, but we've had Viconic soybeans in fields for a number of years, and currently we're seeing them yielding at least with XtendFlex soybeans, if not even already in some cases exceeding the yield potential of XtendFlex soybeans. So we are just so excited to not just bring flexibility to farmers with multiple herbicide tolerances, but what do people care about, right? Yield and agronomics and great products, and Viconic's going to bring that to farmers as well.
Do you want to share a little bit more, maybe, Frank, about some of those numbers that we
saw? I can add to that. So it's kind of interesting. I think it was about 2 years ago when Kacy's predecessor, actually at the time, he always would share with us. He'd seen Viconic, at the time they were still called HD4 soybeans, in the field, and people were always saying, so what did they look like? And they looked like soybeans. But it's the 3rd year that we have them in the field now this year. 3rd year that we're running extensive breeding trials with them. And the pipeline that we're bringing along that Kacy was alluding to, we actually have about 250 products that we're testing this year across all the key maturity groups, all the way from 000s to Group 7s. And then from that, we will choose at the end of the year what would be the potential launch class. So not all of these 250, they have gone through a rigorous process already to be selected to be in the final class. Not all of these 250 will be launched, but that will be the pool we can choose from to then have a group of 80 to 100 product potentially available at launch. Behind that, we have already another 500 that go into testing again this year. That will be our next launch class then for 2028 potentially. So really, it's great to see these products in the field. It's great to know that the product portfolio will not be a limitation. We will be able to cover all the key maturity groups. Kacy alluded to the performance. They're already performing extremely well, meeting or exceeding the commercial checks that we have in the market today. And that's the first generation. It only gets better from here on out. So that's very exciting to see.
So it's finally here to the finish line. What was the initial need that you really saw and now you're capitalizing on?
Yeah, I think the initial need, the fight against weed resistance is an ongoing battle. And while we are getting closer to the finish line for Viconic soybeans, in the fight against weed resistance, there's never quite, it feels like a moving target, that finish line. So the goal is to always stay ahead of that and to always think of what's the next good thing that we can bring to the market. With the Viconic, we're adding 2 tolerances to the existing offerings. That'll be great for growers to have more tools in the toolbox, more flexibility, more things that they can choose. We also bring another herbicide with Convintor, another Group 12 herbicide. So we're adding yet again another tool in the toolbox. We have the next generation after Viconic already that we're working on in the field, the 5th generation of herbicide tolerance that will add PPO chemistries. So again, trying to think what is that next tool that growers will need to have access to. And as we think about HT5 being 3 years behind Viconic, we already have HT6, the 6th generation. I believe we had them first time in the field last year. So while we are here celebrating that we're getting really close to the finish line of introducing Viconic soybeans, we already have the next 2 generations in the field.
You know, you mentioned tools in the toolbox. I want to talk a little bit about dicamba since you guys are here. How does this fit into the dicamba toolbox when we think about this new Viconic product and XtendFlex as well?
So if we start with just XtendFlex soybeans, as Frank already mentioned, that have tolerance to glyphosate, glufosinate, and dicamba. Even though we currently do not have a dicamba registration over the top for XtendFlex soybeans, we have seen time and time again farmers have outstanding weed control. There's options available that can make them very successful with XtendFlex soybeans, even in the absence of dicamba. And then you can get that yield potential that we all expect and that we see consistently from XtendFlex soybeans. That being said, even though I just said, there's clearly a path to controlling weeds without dicamba, we are committed to dicamba. We currently have a new registration in at the EPA. We are continuing to make progress because we believe it's critical that farmers have access to technology like dicamba. So we're hoping that at some point in the future, farmers will once again have access to dicamba over the top for their XtendFlex soybeans. But then it's a critical tool for Viconic. Now, as Frank already mentioned, Viconic soybeans, they all have tolerance to 2,4-D and mesotrione. So we also have labels at the EPA to support all 5 herbicides so that hopefully at the time of launch of Viconic in 2027, farmers have options with all 5 herbicides with Viconic.
Maybe a quick follow-up to that too, Kacy. I think the process of getting an EPA registration and label is very strenuous, but also really interesting. Can you maybe walk us through a little bit of peeking behind the curtain how that process works?
Well, it's a science-based process, right? And one other thing is that it's critical that they get feedback. There's consistently public comment periods, and so hearing from farmers directly about why they need access to these tools and how farmers are great stewards of these tools. So you start with the science and the years upon years of research that shows that a product like dicamba is safe to use and that can be used extremely well. And so you just work the process at the EPA, can start with the science, they get the public comments, and then hopefully it'll lead to a new label.
So you just announced the name. What are you hearing so far from farmers?
There's a lot of excitement for HT4 soybean as they knew it. Now they will need to get used to the name, but I think the name overall reception has been fairly positive. Has been very positive immediately, and there's a lot of excitement around the Viconic soybean and the need for Viconic soybeans. Having 5 tolerances all in one soybean, they immediately latch onto that. Love the flexibility it'll bring. Where we are today is we have 3. Not only do we have 3 tolerance options, but it's also between the alternative platforms that they typically would choose from. It feels a bit like a choice of one versus the other. And the beauty of Viconic, it really brings these together. It makes it not an either or, it makes it an and conversation on the weed control side. I kind of like to say, in a way, you can have your cake and eat it too, and then we're adding mesotrione on top of that with the 5th tolerance. So that really, on the weed control side, it'll offer unprecedented levels of flexibility. It's not an either or, it's a question any longer, it's an and the focus of the conversation will go back to what's the yield that I want to have with my beans, because we know with Viconic soybeans we got the best possible weed control options available to me.
Did you want to add something to that?
I was going to say something else that I've consistently heard from farmers is every other new generation of herbicide tolerances, it started with Roundup Ready. Then we were able to bring Roundup Ready to yield, but still just had one herbicide tolerance. The second generation of herbicide tolerance brought in dicamba, and now we have glufosinate. So it went 1, then 2, then 3. So what I'm consistently hearing from people is they expect the answer to be, oh, this will have 4 herbicide tolerances. So when we're able to say, no, we're going from 3 to 5, that definitely generates a lot of excitement because it gives farmers that flexibility in season. You never know what curveball is going to get thrown, and so to have this much flexibility to be able to pick the best bean for your farm is it's clear that farmers are excited about that.
I think you guys have set the bar really high for yourself too. Now you got to go from 5 to maybe 7, 8, I don't know. But as we kind of wrap up our conversation, I would love to know, we already talked a little bit about you're working on that next generation already. You're in the process, but maybe 5, 10 years down the road, what are some of those really forward thinking challenges that you guys are looking to solve for growers?
I
would say the foundation is always going to be making sure there's yield, right? That we have outstanding yield potential, that we're helping farmers maximize that return on investment. Making a choice of what seed to purchase is emotional, and so we want to ensure that farmers are always getting the most return out of investment. So we talk a lot about our herbicide tolerances and our trait pipeline, but we are continuing to make so many advances in how we breed our products, not just in soybeans, but across all of Bayer's crop portfolio. So we're continuing to say, okay, a farmer in Iowa, what do they need that's different than a farmer in Pennsylvania? And how can we ensure that we're building that right set of germplasm and the right agronomic traits to bring that forward to a farmer? So it's not just trying to stay ahead of what's the next trait that they're going to need, but really what is that base of yield and performance and agronomic characteristics that farmers need.
Well, thank you both for joining us. A lot of great information. Where can growers and farmers learn more?
Bayer.com is always a good source. With the announcement today, also the Viconic website went live. So those are good places to start.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, that was a great interview. Thanks to the guests and you, Delaney, for putting that together. We do see spring fieldwork is in full steam ahead across North America. Pre-plant applications are wrapping up, and farmers are now shifting their focus to planting, meaning side dress fertilizer demand is right around the corner. North America is still grappling with some flooding across key river systems. Arkansas is back to operational, but Ohio's lower river lock system remains shut down. The lower Mississippi is still absorbing excess water, which could impact the movement of fertilizer this season. We'll continue to keep an eye on those river levels, but we also saw U.S. nitrogen supplies remain incredibly tight as retailers are struggling to secure product before June. Higher corn acreage is fueling demand, and some in the retail space say they haven't seen a market this tight in years. Talking phosphate, prices are historically high, currently at the second worst ever corn to phosphate ratio recorded for this time of year. China's phosphate exports have essentially dried up, totaling just 98,000 tons in January and February. That's compared to the typical 9 to 10 million tons annually. The one bright spot in fertilizer seems to be potash, which remains relatively calm despite strong global demand and some supply curtailments. Delaney, but what's happening on the commodity market side of things this week?
Yeah, Tanner. Well, I want to start with the global economic market here. Markets are closed, of course, here for Good Friday as we record this episode. But a couple of things driving the markets this week. As we look at the broader economy, we saw Federal Chair Jerome Powell and President Trump firing some shots back and forth. But we also saw the tech sector may see trouble ahead as the White House announced this week restrictions of certain exports of semiconductors, which pushed Wall Street lower on the news. Export sales came in higher this week than many trade estimates for both corn and soybeans, while wheat sales, however, came in below expectations. And I think what we're going to continue to see here is folks looking for maybe some physical assets to put their dollars behind. Usually when we see tighter economic conditions like this, Wall Street might get a little scared and come into more physical commodities here. So continued volatility ahead, and the other big factor outside of tariffs and trade to watch for will really be how planting season shapes up. Will we get the crop in the ground at a timely fashion? And what's the weather ahead here for the growing season?
That's right. Well, hopefully you and your families get to enjoy Easter weekend. We certainly appreciate you as a listener and those viewers as well. If you haven't watched us, go find us on our other social media platforms and YouTube and enjoy yourself this weekend. But Delaney, for today, I say it's time to let the listeners go.
Let's let them go.